The deafening crack of gunshots shattered the peaceful Wyoming afternoon as Nora Wilson ran for her life across the sprawling prairie, her heart pounding in rhythm with her desperate footfalls. The year was 1876, and what had begun as a simple stagecoach journey had descended into chaos when masked bandits ambushed the vehicle just outside of Laramie. Blood stained the sleeve of her once pristine blue calico dress where a bullet had grazed her arm, but fear pushed her forward despite the searing pain. Behind her, the shouts of men and more gunfire echoed across the open landscape. The tall prairie grass whipped against her skirts as she pushed onward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Nora had no destination in mind, only escape. The stagecoach driver and the other passengers were likely dead, and she had nothing but the small reticule clutched in her trembling hands. Just as her strength began to wane, she heard the thundering of hooves approaching from her left. Panic seized her chest as she changed direction, but her worn boots caught on a hidden rock, sending her tumbling to the ground. As she scrambled to rise, a shadow fell across her. Looking up, she saw a man atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, silhouetted against the brilliant blue sky. "You're safe now that I've found you," the stranger said, dismounting in one fluid motion. His voice was deep and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded this moment. He extended a calloused hand toward her. "Those outlaws won't be following. My partners are handling them." Nora hesitated, her eyes darting back toward the direction of the attack. In the distance, she could see figures on horseback engaged in what appeared to be a fierce gun battle. "I don't know you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sandy brown hair and a jawline shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. "Hank Dawson, madam, Deputy Marshal out of Cheyenne." He gestured to the badge pinned to his leather vest. "We've been tracking this gang for weeks. Didn't expect them to hit the Laramie stage today." Relief flooded through Nora, but her arm chose that moment to remind her of her injury. She winced, clutching at the wound. "You're hurt," Hank observed, concern etching across his features. He knelt beside her, producing a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "May I?" Nora nodded, allowing him to examine the graze. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man of his profession and stature. "Just a graze, thankfully," he said, tying the cloth securely around her arm. "But it needs proper tending. My camp's not far. Can you ride?" "I think so," Nora replied, though in truth she felt light-headed from the ordeal. Hank helped her to her feet and guided her to his horse. With practiced ease, he lifted her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. Nora stiffened at the proximity, but her exhaustion soon won out, and she found herself leaning back against the solid warmth of his chest. "I'm Nora Wilson," she said as they began to ride away from the scene of violence. "I was heading to Sheridan to take a teaching position." "A long way from home then," Hank observed. "Where are you from, Miss Wilson?" "Boston," she replied, feeling oddly comforted by the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and the strong arms that held the reins on either side of her. "My parents passed last winter, influenza." The teaching position was a chance at a new beginning. Hank made a sympathetic noise. "The West can offer that for certain, though it comes with its own trials, as you've seen today." As they rode, Nora noticed the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the endless prairie in hues of gold and amber. Despite the terror she had experienced, she couldn't help but appreciate the wild beauty surrounding them. "There," Hank said, pointing toward a stand of cottonwood trees in the distance. "That's where we've made camp." As they approached, Nora could see two other men tending a fire. They looked up as Hank brought his horse to a halt, their expressions shifting from wariness to understanding as they took in Nora's disheveled appearance. "Boys, this is Miss Nora Wilson," Hank announced as he dismounted before helping her down. She was on the stage. "Miss Wilson, these are Deputies Cooper and Franklin." The men nodded respectfully, and the older of the two, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper beard, immediately offered her a tin cup of coffee. "Outlaws." Deputy Cooper asked Hank. "Rollins' gang, like we suspected," Hank confirmed. 2 dead, 1 wounded, the others scattered when they saw us coming. The other passengers, Nora asked, her voice catching. The deputies exchanged glances and Hank's expression softened. I'm sorry, Miss Wilson, no survivors that we could find. The driver and guard were killed outright. The other 2 passengers as well. Nora closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by how close she had come to sharing their fate. Her escape had been pure chance. She had been outside the coach when the attack began, having asked the driver to stop momentarily so she could gather a few wildflowers she had spotted along the road. Let me tend to that arm properly, Hank said, guiding her to sit on a log by the fire. He retrieved a small medical kit from his saddlebag and set about cleaning her wound with a gentleness that belied his rugged appearance. You're fortunate, he commented as he worked. Another inch and it would have been much worse. I seem to have used up all my good fortune in one day, Nora replied, attempting a weak smile. Hank's eyes met hers, warm and reassuring. Not all of it, I'd wager. You're alive, Miss Wilson. Out here, that counts for quite a lot. As night fell fully, the deputies prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits. Nora found herself ravenous despite the day's trauma and ate gratefully. The men were respectful, maintaining a polite distance and speaking in hushed tones. After the meal, Hank offered her his bedroll. I'll keep watch, he insisted when she protested. You need rest more than I do right now. Too exhausted to argue, Nora accepted his kindness. As she settled beneath the rough woolen blanket, she watched Hank take a position near the fire, his profile strong against the dancing flames. Despite everything, she felt safe for the first time since the attack, and sleep claimed her quickly. She woke to the gentle sounds of morning birds calling, the soft nickering of horses, the crackle of a freshly stoked fire. For a moment, Nora lay still, orienting herself to her surroundings. The events of the previous day crashed back, but the panic she expected didn't come. Instead, she felt an odd sense of calm. Sitting up, she found Hank kneeling by the fire, cooking breakfast. He looked up at her movement and smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Good morning, Miss Wilson. How's the arm feeling? Nora flexed it experimentally. Sore, but better than yesterday, thank you. We'll be heading to Medicine Bow today, he informed her as he handed her a plate of food. It's the nearest town with a proper doctor who can look at that wound. We can send a telegram to Sheridan from there as well, let them know what's happened. The thought of her intended destination brought a wave of uncertainty. What will I do now? My trunk was on the stage. I've lost everything except what I'm wearing and what's in my reticule. Hank considered her predicament. Medicine Bow's a decent town, small but growing with the railroad. They might need a teacher too. Hope flickered within her. Do you think so? Worth asking, Hank said with a shrug. And if not, we can figure something else out. His use of we wasn't lost on Nora. She studied him as he moved about the camp, efficient and purposeful. There was something compelling about Hank Dawson, beyond his timely rescue, a quiet strength and integrity that she found herself drawn to. The deputies broke camp efficiently, and soon they were on the trail to Medicine Bow. Nora rode with Hank again, finding the arrangement less awkward than the day before. As they traveled, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory. He had a dry wit that occasionally broke through his professional demeanor, making her laugh despite her circumstances. How long have you been a marshal? She asked as they rode through a particularly beautiful stretch of prairie dotted with wildflowers. 5 years, Hank replied. Served in the army before that, 7th Cavalry under Custer, though I left before. He trailed off and Nora nodded in understanding. The massacre at Little Bighorn the previous summer had shocked the nation. And you, teaching's your calling, Nora smiled. Yes, though my parents hoped I'd make a suitable marriage instead. They arranged several introductions before they passed, but none of the gentlemen seemed. She searched for the right word. Real, Hank suggested. She looked up at him, surprised by his perception. Exactly, they were all so concerned with appearances and social standing. Out here, that seems so meaningless. It is, Hank agreed. Out here, a person is judged by what they do, not who their family is or how much money they have. It's simpler in some ways, harder in others. They reached Medicine Bow by mid-afternoon. The town was indeed small one Main Street with a handful of businesses, including a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and thankfully, a doctor's office. People stopped to stare as the deputies rode in with Nora, clearly curious about the newcomer. The doctor, a kindly older man named Morrison, cleaned and properly dressed Nora's wound, declaring that she would heal without complications. Afterward, Hank escorted her to the hotel, where he arranged and paid for a room despite her protests. "The government will reimburse me," he assured her. "You're a witness to the Rollins gang attack. Your comfort and safety are part of my duty." The hotel owner's wife, Mrs. Barnett, took immediate pity on Nora's situation and provided her with a clean dress and basic necessities. As she settled into her room, Nora found herself thinking of Hank, wondering if she would see him again before he continued his pursuit of the remaining gang members. Her question was answered that evening when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Hank standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking freshly washed and somewhat nervous. "Miss Wilson," he began, "I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel dining room. The cook here makes a fine steak, I'm told." Nora couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "I would like that very much, Deputy Dawson." The dining room was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps casting a warm glow. As they ate, Hank informed her that he had spoken to the town council about her situation. "As it happens, Medicine Bow has been looking for a teacher. Their last one left 2 months ago to get married. The school's small, just 15 children of various ages, but they're eager to have someone qualified." Nora's heart leapt. "Truly, they would consider me without references." "I vouched for you," Hank said simply, "and they're willing to meet with you tomorrow morning if you're interested." "Thank you," Nora said, touched by his efforts on her behalf. "That's extraordinarily kind." Hank looked slightly embarrassed by her gratitude. "It's nothing, really." "You're clearly educated and they need a teacher. Seems a simple solution." After dinner, they walked along the town's quiet Main Street. The evening was mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Nora found herself relaxing in Hank's company, the horrors of the stagecoach attack receding slightly. "Will you be leaving soon?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "To pursue the rest of the gang," Hank nodded, his expression regretful. "Tomorrow afternoon. Cooper and Franklin have already headed out to track them, but I'll be back through Medicine Bow regularly. It's on my patrol route." The idea of seeing him again lifted her spirits. "Then perhaps we'll meet again, Deputy." "I'd like that," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Very much." The next morning, Nora met with the town council and was immediately offered the teaching position. The school was a simple one-room building at the edge of town, and the salary was modest, but it included accommodations, a small cabin behind the schoolhouse. She accepted gratefully, relieved to have found a purpose and a place to belong so quickly after her ordeal. When she returned to the hotel, Hank was waiting for her, his horse saddled and ready for departure. "Good news?" he asked, noting her expression. "The best," she confirmed. "I start on Monday. They're even providing a place for me to live." "I'm glad," he said sincerely. "Medicine Bow is a good town. You'll be safe here." An awkward silence fell between them, neither wanting to say goodbye. "Well," Hank finally said, clearing his throat, "I should be on my way." "Of course," Nora replied, fighting a sense of disappointment. "Thank you again for everything." Hank mounted his horse but hesitated. "Miss Wilson, Nora, I meant what I said last night. I'll be back through town in a few weeks. Perhaps I could call on you then." The formal request warmed her heart. "I would like that very much, Hank." With a tip of his hat and a smile that seemed to light his entire face, Hank Dawson rode out of Medicine Bow, leaving Nora with a curious mixture of sadness and anticipation. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Nora settled into her new role. The children were eager to learn, and the townspeople welcomed her warmly. She found herself adapting to Western life more easily than she had expected, developing a fondness for the stark beauty of the landscape and the straightforward nature of its inhabitants. Still, she found herself watching the road from the schoolhouse window, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar chestnut horse and its rider. True to his word, Hank returned to Medicine Bow exactly 3 weeks after their parting. Nora was in the middle of a lesson when she heard the murmur of voices outside the schoolhouse. Looking up, she saw him through the window, dismounting his horse. Her heart skipped a beat, and she had to force herself to focus on the arithmetic problem she had been explaining. When the school day ended, Hank was waiting outside, hat in hand, looking as nervous as a schoolboy himself. The children giggled as they filed past him, clearly aware of his interest in their new teacher. "Welcome back, Deputy Dawson," Nora said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Miss Wilson," he replied with a small bow, "you look well. Teaching agrees with you." "It does," she confirmed. "Would you like to see the schoolhouse and perhaps my cabin? It's quite charming, though simple." Hank accepted eagerly, and Nora gave him a tour of her new domain. The schoolhouse was indeed basic but well-built, with rows of desks, a small blackboard, and shelves of books. Her cabin behind it was equally modest, just 2 rooms, but cozy with a small stove, a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. Mrs. Barnett from the hotel had helped her add feminine touches: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, a vase of wildflowers on the table. "It's not Boston," she acknowledged as they stood in the main room, "but I find I don't miss city life as much as I expected." "The West has a way of growing on people," Hank said, looking around with approval. "You've made this place your own already." They had supper at the hotel that evening, and Hank shared news of his pursuit of the Rollins gang. 2 more had been captured, but the leader and several others remained at large. "I'll be in the area for a few days this time," he told her. "The marshal believes they might try to rob the bank in Rollins, and we're setting up surveillance." Nora felt a thrill at the prospect of spending more time with him. "Then perhaps you might attend our town social on Saturday night. It's nothing elaborate, just music and dancing at the town hall, but it's quite enjoyable." "I'd be honored," Hank replied, his eyes warm. "Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer." "I'm an excellent teacher," Nora assured him with a smile. The town social proved to be a lively affair, with nearly everyone in Medicine Bow in attendance. A small band played familiar tunes, and the hall was decorated with paper lanterns and bunting. Nora wore her best dress, a sage green cotton that Mrs. Barnett had helped her alter to fit properly, and felt a flutter of anticipation as she waited for Hank to arrive. When he entered the hall, she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the dusty deputy with his practical attire. In his place stood a handsome man in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and pressed trousers. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and he carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. "You look beautiful," he said simply as he handed her the flowers. Nora felt herself blushing. "And you are quite handsome, Deputy Dawson." True to his warning, Hank was indeed a somewhat awkward dancer, but what he lacked in grace he made up for in enthusiasm. They laughed together as he stumbled through a Virginia reel, and during a slow waltz, Nora found herself drawn closer to him than propriety strictly allowed. "I'm glad I found you that day," Hank murmured as they moved around the floor. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't." "I prefer to think about what did happen," Nora replied softly. "That day was terrible, yes, but it led me here, to this town, to these people." She looked up at him, gathering her courage. "To you." Hank's steps faltered, and for a moment Nora feared she had been too forward, but then he smiled, a slow, radiant smile that transformed his entire face. "I've thought of little else but you since I left," he admitted. "I volunteered for this assignment specifically because it would bring me back to Medicine Bow." The music ended, but they remained standing close together, oblivious to the curious glances from the townspeople around them. "Would you walk with me?" Hank asked. "The night's too fine to spend entirely indoors." They slipped out of the hall and strolled through the quiet town. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light. They talked of everything and nothing: his childhood on a small farm in Colorado, her years at a ladies' seminary in Boston, their dreams and fears and hopes. When they reached her cabin, Nora found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "When will you have to leave again?" she asked. "Day after tomorrow," Hank replied, regret evident in his voice. "But I've been thinking. The marshal's office in Cheyenne has been looking to establish a permanent deputy position here in Medicine Bow, with the railroad bringing more people through. I've put in a request to be considered for it." Hope bloomed in Nora's chest. "You would stay here, permanently, if they approve it," he said, "and if I had a reason to stay." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Nora felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, Hank leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, and over far too quickly. "I should go," he whispered, though he made no move to leave. "You should," Nora agreed, equally motionless. With visible reluctance, Hank finally stepped back. "May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could have a picnic by the creek." "I would like that," Nora said, unable to keep the smile from her face. The next day's picnic extended into the evening as they sat by the creek, talking and laughing, sharing stories and dreams. When Hank finally walked her home, their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had been doing so for years rather than hours. At her door, Hank kissed her again, this time with more confidence, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her close. Nora responded with a fervor that surprised them both, her hands clutching at his shoulders. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hank rested his forehead against hers. "I have to leave tomorrow," he reminded her, his voice rough with emotion, "but I'll be back as soon as I can." "I'll be waiting," Nora promised. The weeks that followed were a mixture of longing and anticipation for Nora. She threw herself into her teaching, developed friendships with the townspeople, and began to feel truly at home in Medicine Bow. But always, there was the thought of Hank, the memory of his kisses, and the hope of his return. His letters arrived regularly, brief but heartfelt, detailing his work and expressing his feelings for her with a directness that would have scandalized Boston society, but that Nora found refreshingly honest. He wrote of his application for the permanent position in Medicine Bow, of his hopes for their future, of how he thought of her constantly. When he finally returned a month later, the reunion was sweet beyond measure. This time he stayed for a full week, and by the end of it, the entire town knew that Deputy Dawson and Miss Wilson were courting seriously. On his last evening in town, Hank took Nora to the same creek where they had picnicked. The autumn air was crisp, the trees beginning to turn golden and red. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant hues, Hank knelt before her and produced a small ring, a simple gold band with a tiny diamond. "I know it's not much," he began, his voice unusually hesitant, "and I know we haven't known each other long by Eastern standards. But out here, life moves differently. I love you, Nora Wilson. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you standing up from the prairie grass, brave despite everything. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Hank Dawson, I will marry you." The ring fit perfectly, and as he rose to embrace her, Nora reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few short months. From the terror of the stagecoach attack to this moment of perfect happiness, it seemed almost impossible. "I have news," Hank told her as they walked back to town hand in hand. "I received a telegram yesterday. The marshal's office has approved my request. I'm to be the permanent deputy for Medicine Bow starting next month." Nora's joy was complete. "So you'll be here with me?" "Every day," he confirmed, squeezing her hand. "Though I'll still have to ride patrol occasionally, but Medicine Bow will be my home base." He paused, looking suddenly uncertain. "There's a small house at the edge of town that's for sale. Nothing fancy, but it has 3 bedrooms. I thought perhaps in time we might fill them." The implication of family, children, a future together filled Nora with warmth. "I would like that very much," she said softly. They were married 2 months later in Medicine Bow's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Nora wore a dress of ivory satin that the women of the town had helped her make, and Hank looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new suit. Deputy Cooper stood as Hank's best man, and Mrs. Barnett served as Nora's matron of honor. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Nora had ever seen in one place. As they swayed together during their first dance as husband and wife, Hank whispered in her ear, "You're safe now that I've found you." Nora smiled up at him, recognizing the words he had spoken when they first met. "And you're home now that I've found you," she replied, their life together unfolded with the changing seasons. Nora continued teaching, though she took a brief hiatus the following year when their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, was born. Hank proved to be as gentle and devoted a father as he was a husband, often bringing Elizabeth to the schoolhouse at day's end so they could walk home together as a family. The Rawlins gang was eventually captured entirely, ending that chapter of their lives completely. Medicine Bow grew along with the railroad, and Hank's position became increasingly important as the town expanded. They added onto their house as their family grew to include a son, Samuel, 2 years after Elizabeth. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Hank took Nora riding out to the prairie where he had found her fleeing from gunfire. The landscape was peaceful now, wildflowers bobbing in the breeze, no hint of the violence that had once occurred there. "I come here sometimes when I'm on patrol," Hank admitted as they spread a blanket on the grass. "To remember how close I came to never meeting you at all." Nora leaned against him, contemplating the twists of fate that had brought them together. "I used to think that day was the worst of my life," she mused. "Now I see it was just the beginning of everything good." Hank wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I thank God every day that I was riding this way, that I found you when I did." "As do I," Nora said, tilting her face up for his kiss. "As do I." They remained there until sunset, two people who had found in each other not just love but a shared purpose, a home, and a future as vast and promising as the western sky above them. And as they rode back toward town toward their children, their home, their life together, Nora reflected that sometimes the greatest blessings came disguised as moments of greatest peril. For it was in running for her life across that prairie that she had found not just safety, but love that would last a lifetime.